or walking discs as prototypic little animals on the ground. So remember that these discs, although they are discs, were curiously aligning and forming groups. And so I had explained you with the hands why they were aligning, and it was a matter of relaxation dynamics, both the relaxation of their velocity towards the nominal velocity after some kind of perturbation, but it was also a matter of the relaxation of their orientation towards the velocity because of some internal torque inside in the particle because of their locomotion on the ground. And so friction is usually creating a torque if you are not aligned with the way you have been designed. I mean, the same would happen when you drive a car, as a matter of fact. And so then I claimed that it would be nice to define a little bit better what alignment means and to have a formula that gives some physical insight in what it is. And so I put myself in a setting where maybe I was not really clear enough about this. I forget about all spatial dependencies. And so if you remember about Hugues' lecture, he derived explicitly the kinetic theory from the Boltzmann equation for the Vicek model. And there was a Landau part, which is homogeneous in space, which was something times m minus something times m cube, where m is first order f1 or f2 if you are considering nematic Fourier mode in the angular distribution. And I'm doing exactly the same thing, except I forget about all the gradient terms, but I want to know what is these coefficients a in front of m and psi in front of m cube, not only for the Vicek model, for a generic case. Now what I mean by a generic case, and that was very important, is still a case where the modulus of all these impulsion or velocities are relaxed to 1 at the end of the scattering event. That was the very important point. Okay, so that was the goal. So I want to know how the total polarization will evolve. And I argue that there would be some evolution related to diffusion. And that's the amount of momentum that is changed during one diffusion event, one kick. And then there is lambda scattered times delta p related to a scattering event. Hugues had a very, very similar formula to that. That was called the integral of diffusion, the integral of scattering, and then he has an integral of advection where there is a gradient. Because I'm considering homogeneous problem, I have no gradient. That's why this term is not there. Okay? So we wrote this. I'm really interested in psi, which is the modulus of p. So because of this, there was a step where I was actually using the fact that dp over dt is modulus of it's psi. Okay, it's d psi over dt p hat plus psi d theta p over dt psi perpendicular, so that this equation I had to project it on p hat. That's just, I can also compute these ones if I'm interested in, but here I suppose there is no chiral stuff, so there won't be rotations, spontaneous rotations. I'm only interested in this one, so I will have to project this on P. That was one step. And then I have to evaluate this term for diffusion and for scattering. For diffusion, it was very simple. So let's write it here. So for diffusion, we had something like 1 over lambda diffusion d psi over dt diffusion was minus 1 minus the integral over the noise that is taking place during the scattering events. It's the the noise that is taking place in the when you are away from the scattering event. Sorry, cos eta times psi. This is linear, and this is a diffusion constant. Well, let's put the lambda diff here. equal minus lambda diff. This is a diffusion constant, and it's positive. So the diffusion always damp the tendency of the system to grow some order. That's fair. And then there was, and that was of course much more complicated, there was the deep psi over dt scattering, which is, again, there is a frequency of scattering event, lambda scattering, and then there was the integral over all the possible scattering event, minus pi the incoming angle. One is, okay, I will write the formula and then this, sorry, this is the parameter of the scattering collision. So this can be the cross section for disk, for hard spheres, but it can be anything else. A kinetic kernel. And then in these kind of things, there will naturally be the product of the distribution for the probability of the particle 1 and 2. This product is assuming molecular chaos as always. And we cannot do anything if we didn't specify anything. And then I made an ansatz to say that my distribution is parameterized by the value of my order parameter. This is a strong assumption. It's obvious that if I know the distribution, I can compute the average value of the order parameter, because psi is nothing else but the average over the angles of this distribution f1 of theta t, the orientation of the particle p hat d theta, and then I take the modulus. So if I know this, of course I know this, and I was saying the reverse. I say, okay, let's assume that I know this at some time, and that it will parameterize this distribution. The fact that I can parameterize distribution only with the average is a very strong assumption. Maybe I would need, I mean, in principle, I need all the moments. I could also need the variance and, okay, and doing this, I had obtained the fact that now this product of distribution becomes a simple function of psi at time t delta. And here I had my p delta p, which is of course a function of delta and zeta. This is the rules that govern the collision. Delta p is the change of momentum, and p delta p is the projection of delta p on the incoming momentum in the collision. Okay? And this is a function of psi if I know my distribution. So I should also tell you what is g. G of psi times t delta is equal to 2 pi over the modulus of p integral over all the possible incoming angle. And then this gamma psi for the two incoming particles, theta bar minus delta over 2 cos theta bar, where gamma psi is my ansatz. Ansatz was f the theta times t is equal a function of theta only, parameterized by psi at time t. Okay, that's where we were. We had a closed equation for the order parameter by just adding these two things. D psi over dt equal this one plus this one. Okay, so now if I want to test these ideas, I need to be even more specific and precise the shape of this gamma theta. And remember, when I recap the rolling colloids, I told you, depending around what state you are, the isotropic one or the polar one, you should make different ansatz. Because in one case you are around the polar state, the distribution will be peaked around this polar state. In the other case you are isotropic, the distribution is almost flat. There must be different ansatz. And here I will make something which is a little bit maybe audacious, is to say, okay, let's make an ansatz that is valid across all the values of the order parameter. And I will select, and I'm held by the fact that it's a distribution on a circle, I will select the von Mises distribution. I will say, okay, for gamma, let me take the von Mises distribution. So what is the von Mises distribution? It's some kind of generalization of the Gaussian for a periodic circle. I will write it down because we talk about it, I mean, from the beginning of this school, but no one has never written it. It's something like this, divided by 2 pi I0 of k. So k is a parameter of this distribution. For the moment, I mean, this is just a mathematical formula for this distribution. When R0 is some Bessel function of some kind. Okay. Now, this distribution, if I inject it here, I want it to satisfy at least that its average is what I want. Otherwise, I'm really crazy. Okay? So if I inject this here, I can compute this, and I want this to be psi, and this gives me an implicit relation I1 of k divided by I0 of k is psi. So this gives me k of psi in an implicit way. Well, that's uncomfortable that it's implicit with 2 ratio of Bessel function, but that's life. It's monovalued, so no problem. K of psi. So this means that if I give you psi, you can compute k, and so you know the distribution, and so this is my gamma psi, okay, of theta. It's clear? Why is this distribution nice? Because for psi much smaller than 1, this distribution using the von Mises is 1 over 2 pi 1 plus 2 psi cos theta. So this is the most natural linear expansion for any angular distribution around psi equal 1 over 2 pi. So it has the good behavior in the small pi limit. It converges towards the uniform distribution with the right first order term. And for psi much larger than 1, then this distribution is really, I will not write it down, you know the expression by heart, the Gaussian centered on some specific angle, the one, okay, theta 0, with variance kappa. Ah, sorry, of course, thank you. Okay, so we know the distribution, it's a mathematical formula, it's parameterized by psi, that's exactly what I wanted. It has the nice behavior from the large psi limit and from the small psi limit. In the middle, I don't know. But it's a parameter, like when you have sigma for the Gaussian. Then the what? No, it's the same. If I impose that this distribution has an average psi, because that's what I want, then it must satisfy this formula. It is. It happens. It is monovalues. It is. You ask Mathematica to plot them, and okay. And so that fixes the value of the parameter of my distribution. Okay. So I know the distribution, so I can compute this. This is just integrals over angles for a known distribution. I can do it, or rather Mathematica can do it. So g of psi and delta becomes, okay, kappa, which remember is a function of psi, I0 square of kappa, I1 over 2 of 2 kappa cos delta over 2 divided by 2 kappa cos delta divided by 2. So now I have my g, which is a function of psi and delta that is known. No, theta 0 would be the, you see, if psi is close to 1, it means that P has selected an angle. Let's call it theta large P. It is this main angle, which I had set to 0 in the beginning. But here I want to recall you that, okay? So now this is nice, because now I have this distribution. I can inject it here. And so formally, the problem now is really solved. I really have a closed equation, dip psi of dt, function of psi, and this one is entirely known. Just need to integrate all this for my specific model and for my kinetic collisional rules. My collision rules and my kinetic kernel. Okay? Okay, so if I, okay, last step, and this I can really do. I mean, numerically, I can compute this for a bunch of collisions. I will show you this on the computer in a minute. This I know, if I say it's disk, this is the Boltzmann cylinder factor, the sinus delta divided by 2. That tells you that if you are in a gas and you have disk, there are less collision occurring if you are moving parallel to each other than if you are moving, this is just kinetic. And I know my distribution. So just to give you the last step, I'm not interested in fully solving this. Well, I'm interested in it, and we did it, but I was interested in really writing down the expansion. So now linearizing for psi much smaller than 1. Can linearize this, I can linearize everything. And I will end up with 1 over lambda, yes, scattering, d psi over dt equal what? Yes, maybe I should say what I linearize, not so that you don't get lost. So what I linearize is this. So I linearize the equation 1 over lambda d psi over dt equal f of psi, that I know, minus d over lambda psi, which was the part coming from the diffusion. I linearize this. It will give me something like mu minus d over lambda psi minus, I put a minus here for convenience, psi cube. That's pretty clear, right? Where mu psi minus psi cube is the first order expansion, so it's a little bit more than a linearization. Okay, I linearize and I also compute the next term. Sorry? No, this is the lambda scat. The lambda diff is included in the d. This is an important point, actually. Okay? It's clear? No mystery here? Okay. So I do this. And this is really, it's a pity I miss just a little bit of place. Okay, let's write it here. And I find the mu equal the average of P delta P, let me note this like this, and psi equal 1/2 minus cos delta P delta P, average like this, and this average is simply d delta d zeta k delta zeta of the point, what I compute. So let me clarify. So when linearizing, of course, you get rid of all these complications. The distribution is now replaced by essentially two numbers, mu and psi. And you average now, you see on the distribution where So essentially, what are you computing here? You are computing the average of P delta P, which is a property of the collision, of each binary collision. It does depends on the incoming angle and the cross-section and all the parameters of the collision. And I integrate this over all the possible values of this parameter with simply the kinetic weight. Okay? It means I give you a model. Instead of doing computation with 1,001 million particles, you take 2 of them many, many, many times. You sample them according to the kinetic kernel, and you compute the average value of this, of the P delta P that you compute for each collision, and you average over all your collisions, and you get a number. This number will be mu. If mu is larger than the diffusion divided by the rate of scattering event, which is essentially proportional to density. Okay, so if mu is larger than d over something proportional to density, I will have collective motion. Just need to do binary collision statistics. That's what we really gain. This is exactly the result of Bertin and Rose, except that instead of having a formula with the Fourier modes, amplitudes, etc., here what you realize is that alignment is, in the absence of noise, we have now a formula for this word. Alignment is P delta P, that is the variation of momentum projected on the incoming momentum of the collision, average over all possible binary collision. That's what alignment is. So in the absence of noise, if mu is positive, the system will go towards collective motion. In the absence of diffusive noise, I mean. Okay? And now note also that the third order term, again, it's P delta P that comes in, and there is just a geometrical factor implying the incoming angle of the collision. And actually, we can compute other terms, and you will just change the geometrical factor, and you will still see P delta P coming in. So that's really the physical quantity that dominates the physics. Okay. What is this, you mean? It's a dot. These are really vector. This is a scalar. P delta P, it's the same quantity. Okay, is that clear? Let's make it really concrete by implementing this on different models. So, Julia, I need the screen. Stop. Question. No, because psi is small, so this will always be subdominant. So the instability, you need the eigenvalue to have some. No, I didn't say that. I'm talking about this one. I say if this one is positive or negative, I have instability or not. If psi is positive, so statement of Hugues-Châtet yesterday, for all Vicek-like model, psi is positive. Remember this statement he did? And I will see that for different model, it can be positive, negative, etc. But not for Vicek-like. But this is the neutral case. Yes, but I mean, this is class. Yes, if the eigenvalue is 0, but this is non-generic, it will happen for one value of the control parameter, then you are controlled by the nonlinear term. Indeed. It's fine. It's time to move on. Okay, so let's apply this, if this is willing to come. No? Yes, VGA. Ah. Okay. 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 Yes. Okay, so that was what I introduced. Okay, recap. Okay, so here are our equations. We are going to play with them graphically. So I want to compute mu and psi, and I have to do average over this. So let's be more specific. I want to compute mu and psi. So p delta p average over 0 is my mu. Here the definition is not exactly the same. I included this one in. Okay, that's a... But anyhow, I want to compute this quantity. So I have to integrate over all the incoming angle. This, okay, the kinetic kernel, I have to precise the kinetic kernel. So, for example, if I do something like a disk that are colliding, I told you many times, it's just the Boltzmann cylinder, so it's sinus delta divided by 2, delta varied between 0 and pi. So this is just the sinus between 0 and pi over 2. I could have made something more mean field-like, where I don't really care where the particles are coming from, and then I would have a constant. This is a matter of choice in your model. So let's consider here the Boltzmann cylinder. Then, if I want to compute p delta p, well, I have nothing to put in the integral. There is no geometric factor. If I want to compute psi, I have to put 1/2 minus cos delta, which is this function. And then, there is here the p delta p integrated over all the properties of the scattering event. And this is completely model dependent, but once integrated of the properties of the scattering event, it will be a function of delta. And now this is a number. These are numbers, right? That's the rule of the game. Clear? So zeta, for example, if you have disks, would be, I will precise it right now. Let's do it for 2 models, and you will see what it is. So let's do V-check. For V-check, what do you say? You have particles in the middle of nowhere. They have diffusion with some noise. Then they scatter. Let's say that it's dilute enough so that there are only 2 of them. They scatter, and so usually they say it's the same noise. You could have imagined that it's another noise. Hugues actually mentioned that. But so this is now a noise related to the alignment. And then again, they go away and they diffuse again. Now, in this collision, in principle, you depend on the incoming angle, and then what are the rules you put in. And here, the V-check noise of the collision would be the zeta. This is something that is a property of the collisional process. So here, what I would have for V-check is very simple, because you come with an incoming angle, you align plus noise. So it's independent on the incoming angle. So then the integration of the incoming angle that I had to perform is super easy. And if I said that this noise is Gaussian, I can even do everything analytically. So I would integrate p delta p. P delta p for V-check I can compute. This is modulus of p, cosinus of the noise put on particle 1, plus cosinus on the noise put on particle 2, because each one receives a different value of the noise, minus modulus of p. I put this in my equation. I integrate over delta. Doesn't play much role. Okay, not over delta, over the noise, which are the zeta. The zeta is the property of the, so I integrate over the zeta, and I get this function, which is a function of the incoming angle only, okay? And parameterized by the parameter of the collision, which is the amplitude of the noise in the collision. Is it clear? I was maybe a bit confusing. I take the V-check model, particles arrive. Imagine there is no diffusion outside of the collision. They arrive, they collide, align perfectly, plus noise. This leads to a p delta p equal this. Super simple to compute. Okay? Now, the collision is parameterized by the amplitude of this noise, which I call sigma. This is the only thing that is in the V-check interaction rule. Total alignment plus some noise. I integrate over this noise, the p delta p, and this gives me this formula, which is now a function of the incoming angle, delta, and of course, the parameter of the collision, the amplitude of the noise. And this is the curve that I find. This is very important. I find curves, so if the noise is very, very weak, it's always positive. So when I will integrate this over delta, it will be positive. Very, 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 very low noise in the collision. I put no diffusion around. Obviously, I will have alignment. The integral of this will be positive. Then I had some noise in the collision. And what do I observe? I observe that the curves go down. Where do they go down? They go down at small angle, small incoming angle. Why? Because in VCheck, when you arrive almost well aligned, then the noise has more chance to disalign you than aligning you, because you are already very well aligned. On the contrary, when you arrive with a large angle, then the curves resist pretty well the presence of noise, because you arrive with a very large angle, you say up, fully aligned plus some noise. So that's why these curves are behaving this way. As a matter of fact, the curves with zero noise is actually the best curve you can imagine in any model, because you cannot do better than that. You cannot do better than saying whatever the angle, I end up fully parallel. So this is actually a bound for all model of active matter. And if the noise is infinite, this is this curve, you cannot be worse than that. Whatever the incoming angle, you go out random. So that's also a bound. So all active matter model have curves that are in this space here, the integral of which have a sign, and this sign tells you if you are stable or not, facing the external diffusion. Okay, so now let's take another model. Did you have time to write down what you wanted? Because since it slides, so it slides but handwritten. Okay, so give you time to write down. So let's take another model. We take disk. These disks are active, so they have a propelling force. There is no torque, it's not yet my walking grains, just disk, but they have inelastic collision. So I gave you this example last time. They have inelastic collision. They bounce into each other. Because of inelasticity and momentum conservation during the collision, they will reduce the angle. And then because they will reduce the angle by reducing their velocities to conserve the momentum. And then because they're active, they will gain again momentum that they will take in the ground. And so the scattering event will not conserve the momentum. That was the difference between conserving the momentum in the collision or in the scattering event, which are different things for active matter. Okay, now here I cannot solve this problem. Geometrically, it's a bit of a nightmare, because here the zeta, who asked me the question, the zeta here is the cross section. You have two disks. They have many, many different ways to collide, and there is a geometrical things that define this. If it's in 3D, it's even more nightmare. And so I will simulate this. I will take the Boltzmann, oh, not yet. So I will simulate this, and I will compute this quantity, which is again the average over P delta P over all possible geometries of collision. So for each collision, I compute P delta P. This depends on two parameters, the cross-section and the incoming angle. I average over all the cross-sections. So I have a function of delta. And now look, if the spheres are perfectly inelastic, super overdamping, then it's like the VCheck model with no noise. I will essentially align completely. So this is this curve here. So this is not well represented here on this curve, but this curve here is for very, very, very small inelastic coefficient. And this curve, I should have put this thing on the same scale, is actually inside this one, because it's not yet perfectly VCheck. And then when I go towards elastic collision, then I align less and less. That's intuitive. But now it means that the integral of this curve has to lower, because we understand that the alignment is the integral of this curve. But look, the integral indeed lowers, because now there's a negative part here. But it's not at all the same shape as in VCheck. Here, the small angle resists. Because when you have, if you play BR, if you have balls, or let's say if you play, okay, you have disks, then when they are almost aligned, a collision even in elastic will keep you aligned. It will not disalign you. On the contrary, if you come with large angle, you go anywhere, which is actually responsible for molecular chaos. Fortunately, there is this property. Convex objects, when they collide with large angle, go anywhere. And so that's what happens here. It's the large angle that are destroyed by the fact that you go towards the elastic limit. So now the elastic limit, the elastic parameter is your microscopic parameter in your model. Here it was the noise. You tune these two parameters in such a way that you enforce or decrease what you think is the alignment. In both cases happens what you want, that is that here you increase the noise, you decrease the overall alignment because the integral goes negative. Same here, but not the same way. The physics in the scattering event is very different. Now, the real question is this microscopic difference a key element of the physics at large scale? And I mean, if we like universality class, we say no, 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 cannot be. So let's proceed. We take these curves that we have obtained, which is this integral. And we have to integrate them against a constant. That's simple. This times this is this. Against the Boltzmann cylinder. The Boltzmann cylinders give some weight to the large delta. So it will give more importance to the right of the curve than to the left of the curve. So when I compute my mu, I will favor the right of the curve. Okay? Because of this. Okay. Here now it becomes negative, so this times this will actually turn this positive. So Witschek is very lucky. Negative side here, made positive because of the negative kinetic factor of Boltzmann. Even when you increase noise, it resists super well. Because where this is positive, it remains positive. Where this becomes negative, it becomes negative. The integral has a lot of chance to remain positive. You compute this, you find this as a function of the amplitude of the noise. Low noise, your integral is positive. Large noise, and here I really went to very large noise, you finally have something negative. Okay. Now what about the other one? The other one is the same story, except that now you have this geometrical factor, which again favors a lot the Witschek scenario. It will make this very positive, and the negative part again will become positive. And this part here is so strong that Xi is always positive. That was the statement of Hughes. Now it's not only the result of a calculation. We understand physically what in Witschek alignment ensures that the third order term is always saturating the linear instability. It's the fact, it's the properties of the collision times this geometrical factor that appears here and the Boltzmann cylinder. Okay? Let's apply this to the other curve that we have computed. Again, I take this, I multiply by this. Now, of course, here it becomes negative. Here it's negative, it remains negative, so that's very bad. And same for the other one. And so again, you see that here, as a function of the elasticity coefficient, so here I'm elastic, here I'm super overdamped, I mean super inelastic. Here I will have an integral that is positive, here an integral that is negative. And if I compute the one for Xi, it is more negative in some sense. It resists not so well because of what I just explained. And so Xi is now negative. So I'm not saturating the instability at the third order term, which means that I will need an expansion in higher order terms to saturate it. And you see, we understand really where it comes from. It comes from the microscopic property of alignment. Okay, the Witschek-like alignment is a very specific one. Collision of disk, it happens that whatever the models you do, you end up with something like this. Hence with something like this. Now here, there is no, I've computed P delta P and this one. Now I have to phase diffusion. Okay, so let's phase diffusion. So this is exactly the figures I just showed you. Diffusion is 0, this is P delta P, this is Xi, it's positive at the same place, this is the Witschek case. Now if I add noise, does it work? Yes. If I add noise, mu now must not only be larger than 0, it must be larger than d over lambda. So I have to increase mu to have instability. If I increase mu, I only increase Xi, it will not change anything. My transition for homogeneous state, between homogeneous state that I have not studied the stability of, my transition will be second order, Landau-like, which justify completely the fact that in the Tornaccio equation you stop yourself at order epsilon cube, all the discussion of Hughes yesterday. Now in this case, first I should go further. We did it for the inelastic hard disk. You have to go to order 9 to find the coefficient that is positive. Okay, that's life. Now I add noise. I have to get a mu larger. And so at some point I get a psi positive. So I predict that there is a transition for the homogeneous phase between a very first order transition and a second order one, which is something really new. Again, for homogeneous states. Not here there is no bands, etc., right? And the transition, because of what I said about the coefficient, you have to go to order 9 or 11, is, I mean, super first order, super sharp. It's not like, you know, when you have the usual 5 order terms. Okay. So microscopically, we have different rules of alignment. Now, macroscopically, for homogeneous phases, it's not at all the same universality class. But the story, unfortunately or fortunately, is not over. It happens, as Hugues has explained you, that in the Vicek model, this branch of solution here has a range where it's unstable. That is, you have to do the linear stability analysis of the bifurcated solution, which means that there is a range of parameters of your model where you have no homogeneous stable solution, so you have to go somewhere else. Somewhere else means a nonlinear solution somewhere in phase space. This nonlinear solution is the band. We don't know how it's selected. They've computed the fact that there are 3 infinite families of possible solutions. One is selected by the noise. It is still work going on progress. But that makes the story, okay, now these bands might exist here. I have no way to compute nonlinear solutions in general. It's a very difficult problem. I cannot use the trick that they used to compute them here because I don't have the right to stop my Turner-Tue expansion at order 3. I have to put the next order, and so in principle I should put the next order in gradients, and so my mapping on an ODE problem becomes absolutely a true nightmare. Remember, he computed, well, he transformed the EDP in an ODE to compute this wave, so this band solution. It becomes here a true nightmare. The potential in which they travel is, I mean, it's not only a few fixed points and a few limit cycles, so you cannot do it. So I don't know. Here also there might be bands. And in this case, because there is always noise, it might well be that since the bands, as Hugues showed you, are nucleated, you don't have to go up to here. There is noise, so you nucleate the nonlinear solution at some point, like in a liquid gas transition. This is the spinodal. You never reach it if you have noise. You jump before. So it happens that the bimodal, which is always hiding the criticality of the spinodal. Remember, the bimodal are not critical. It's the spinodal that are, and at the critical point, the bimodal and the spinodal merge, and there everything is critical. Here, you can jump anywhere, and that's something similar happens actually here. I showed you that in the disk, there are bands. So all this delicate physics that we have been doing, because nature is a little bit fallacious, is hidden by a nucleation process that hides you the universal property of the transition. So whether this will impact large-scale solution, the shape of the bands, the shape of the fronts, is a complete open question. Yes? I don't know. I've not looked at that. It is super ordered, as you can see. And actually, okay, so now let's come back to the walking disk. So remember, we have this model. We take 2 particles, poof, poof, simulate all the collisions, compute this exactly the way I've done it for you graphically, and I find mu as a function of the parameter of the problem. For Vicek, it was the noise in the collision. For the inelastic particle, it was the elastic coefficient. Here, it's alpha. Alpha is the ratio of the orientation time scale, the time scale governing the relaxation of the orientation towards the velocity because of this torque that is present in my walking disk, and tau v is the relaxation time of the velocity. And I discussed with you when I made the collision with the wall That it was essentially the ratio of these two time scales that govern whether you will go back to the wall or you would bounce away from the wall. Okay? So this is my microscopic parameter. So these curves are exactly the analogous of the curve I just showed you before. So these ones. Which one? These ones. This as a function of the microscopic parameter, and this as a function of the microscopic parameter. Come on. Okay, and here they are. And here again, you see something that, so for mu equals 0, so here there are two parameters, alpha and tau v, because this is already dimensionless, and these are curves for different tau v. Let's forget about it. Let's fix tau v. You always have a bump. What is important, you are negative at small alpha. You have a bump, and you tend towards 0 at large alpha. So it means that mu is positive here, in a range between alpha equal here and alpha equal infinity. Okay, and psi is negative. Again, it's very first order. And it is the same reason as for the disks, for the inelastic disk. Okay, now I need to add noise if I want to discuss how this face diffusion, exactly in the same spirit as before. Sorry. So I add noise. I'll come back to this later. I add noise, which means mu must be larger. And you see if mu becomes larger, at some point psi becomes positive. So again, I have a transition from a first order to a second order with the presence of noise, of diffusion noise. And this is now the full phase diagram. This is alpha. This is the amplitude of the noise, rescaled by the frequency of collision. So here, zero noise, we have one threshold. This is here. This is when mu equals 0. This selects the value of alpha. And then all above mu is positive. But then when you add noise, actually what you do, you are just describing this curve. And so this is essentially this plot here in blue. The continuous lines are the result of this calculation when you have sampled your binary collisions. And these plots here, these symbols, are when you do the simulation for a large number of particles, but in a box small enough that you don't generate any nonlinear, non-homogeneous solution, so that this homogeneous description is valid. Otherwise, and here again, you can see two snapshots. The transition is super abrupt, and the ordered phase is actually stable down to very, very low value. Once you have a line, if there is not much noise, it's super, super difficult to disalign the ordered phase in a small box where you have no possibility to use long wavelength modulation. I don't know. Yes, I don't know. Many things to look at. No, I can say something. You see that, okay, let's multiply by lambda. The mu lambda is the mu rho, which is responsible with the coupling with the mass to the density fluctuations. So they should be there. Yes, yes. And so in the paper, we discussed that. And then you have chiral effects and all these kind of things. Yes. This is the part. This is this part. Then you can compute whether some orientation and rotating current sets in the system. Yes, you can do that. Why? Okay, if you make an interaction rule such that when you have relaxed all the time scales in your active process, delta p is 0, then you are completely marginal. I don't know what happens. It's a very bizarre case. I don't know. I asked myself this kind of question. I don't know really what the answer is. Okay, so that's clear. So you see why I like this story is, okay, you forget about gradients. Of course, you don't capture the true long-range physics, which in this case is really dominated by these long wavelengths problems, etc. But I understand first what alignment means. alignment means this average of P delta P over all possible binary collision, and I think that's nice. And I understand also how the physics of the alignment at the microscopic scale can influence the large-scale physics for homogeneous states. And I mean significantly. Now just a comment here, just to see if you capture really what's going on. I take some level of diffusion noise, right, in the outside of the collision, of the scattering. So alpha is very small, which means what? Which means that tau n is very small, which means that this is a very fast dynamics, which means n's aligns very fast to the velocity. Remember the collision with the wall, it means everything looks like if I had an elastic collision with the wall. This has a little chance, let's put this better again. This has little chance to produce polar motion, and indeed it's isotropic. Then I increase the persistence of n, and the persistence of n is what makes a memory of my alignment, so it's normal that this is useful, and I enter the polar phase. Then why is it that when I further increase the persistence of n, I go back to the isotropic state? Sorry? Exactly. It will be hard to lose your initial memory. That is, you come with your initial orientation, someone comes to talk to you and say, come on, let's align. So yes, maybe, but I remember my initial orientation. That's not a good way to make collective alignment. So you see, alpha equal 1 is the good collective, that is really the good collective behavior. You are not too persistent, otherwise you don't listen to the others, but you are not also, I mean, too like a girouette, for those who know what it is. Otherwise, you don't contribute to the alignment of the others, and that's this case. Okay, so we should work in listening to the others, but keeping our own ideas. That's the message. Okay, just a point. This is looking at the ansatz. I made the ansatz about the distribution of the orientation. In simulation, I can look at the distribution of the orientations. So the black lines are the von Mises distribution represented for different values of the order parameter psi that parameterize the distribution. Psi equals 0, the distribution is homogeneous, and this is true both for von Mises and simulation, well, fortunately. And then I increase psi, and you see that for psi small enough, the distribution is really doing well the work, and then, okay, here, and so this is in the case of the Witschek model. This will, of course, be model dependent. If all distributions were the same for all models, the life would be easy. So, and you see that, okay, here the von Mises does not, I mean, Witschek is actually having actually a more sharpened distribution around its alignment, but I mean, it's not such a big deal. That is, when you look at what you compute, you average over all this, over the black line, over the red line, it will not make a big difference. Even when you plug them in log-log, you see that, okay, there are some discrepancies, but we are talking about 10 to the minus 6, 10 to the minus 5 here. So for the Witschek model, the von Mises distribution is a very good model. I didn't recover the figure for the hard disk. And for the hard disk, it's not as good in the middle range, but it's again, you will have discrepancies, but they have the right shape. So that was a good idea to make this ansatz. That's just a comment. Okay, so to stop with this story, here are the readings. So these are the experiments describing the walking grains. This is the paper describing the rolling colloids. Remember, there is also the nature materials. I forgot to add it, about the sound wave. And this is all what I told you about what is alignment, computing this, understanding the role of P delta P. And this is really understanding the role and applying to Witschek and to inelastic particles. And this is applying to the walkers, to the true model of the walkers. So the last part of the story. Okay? Good. I'm relaxed because I still have time, so now I can decide what I tell during the next. So how much time do I have? 40 minutes. 35. Okay? Questions about this part? That was really the main central course lecture, so. Can you tune experimental parameters? No, the answer is no. The very big limitation of this experiment is I can tune, the packing fraction is super easy, as I will show you. I can tune a little bit the amplitude of the noise, but by increasing the vibration. And then if I increase it continuously in one run, it will be consistent. But then from one realization of the experiment to another one, another day, another week, another place, from Saclay to ESPCI, for example, gravity must be different. We are on a mountain instead of a plateau. And then you don't match exactly your noise. So you could do something which is for each experimental run, you reanalyze the single particle dynamics in the gas phase, and so you can map by computing the diffusion coefficients, etc., your different experiments. It's almost doing biology. It's too difficult.
Have you observed both first order and second order?
So the experimental system is too small. In the experimental system, I showed you what we see. We see another parameter that climbs more or less continuously to 0.5. But if you do the Vicek model with the same number of particles, you would not see the band. You would see the same thing. That was actually the very first simulation by Vicek. That's why during 10 years there's been a fight whether it's first order or not, and blah, blah. So no, the experiment is not there for that. As I will show you, the experiment is there to point at certain interesting behavior, qualitative behavior. So here we could see that there was alignment. That was a very strong surprise. And we understood it here. Now I will discuss how we can use it to measure mechanical pressure and see if they balance in the case of active matter. We can discuss things like what Laetitia was discussing. Imagine I increase the number of disks. Because these are disks in 2 dimensions, they want to form an hexagonal lattice of some kind. Laetitia has discussed the exatic phase, this complicated transition. Again, the experiment will not tell me, the system is too small, if the transition from liquid to exatic is first order or not. That will not be the point. But I will be able to see defects, etc. I will be able to look at the local dynamics. This will give me ideas that I can then check in simulations of the same system, because I'm now sure that I have a good model for the system. So that's really how I use this setup, to give me intuition of what's going on, and then if you want to explore parameters, I use the simulations. You mean transfer of momentum because of this? Well, yes, it's true. I did more like, yes, it's true. So some viscosity would take place, but that's a gradient term. If you make the Enskog things to compute the transfer of momentum, that's what you are thinking of. This is useful if you want to compute the viscosity, which is a gradient term. It does not play any role in the homogeneous level, so that's why I didn't care about it. Other questions? Yes. Excellent question. Okay. The trivial scaling of mu with density, the mean field scaling, is in lambda scattering. Okay, and lambda is proportional to rho, and that's the dependence of the first coefficient Hugues was referring to. Because of this, you balance this with the noise, you find the Vicek diagram with the square root of rho, because amplitude of noise is square, and so this is really taking the square root of lambda. This is so the square root in the Vicek diagram for small rho is just this, nothing else. Now, all the calculations are made for low densities. If I have now densities that are a bit larger, there might be a renormalization of the coefficients which are now non-trivial. You can see them here. This is from the Vicek model, binary collision obeying Vicek rules. Rho equal 10 minus 3 is the red dots. You don't see them. They are on the black line, which is the one of the kinetic theory. Rho equal 10 minus 1, it's already the triangle here. Rho equal 1, it's this curve. Look, something that is amazing. So this is now really the mu of rho, not including the lambda. Look, it's amazing. The density is favoring disorder. It's pushing the transition towards there. So the renormalization of mu, that of course I don't know how to compute, not at all, is actually favoring the density is actually creating noise. This is actually the simple noise of collision disk. And this is actually pushing the transition to further values of sigma. So it's acting on the other way than this one. But this one is a dominant term. But it's interesting to realize this. Okay, other questions? No? Okay. So let's move to another story. So the two other stories, I will not deal with them in detail. I really do them. No, it's not this story. Because of the lectures that you had, one by Yariv Gavri and the other one by Laetitia Culandolo. Because of this, I don't need much introduction. So, and here, don't take notes. I refer you to the paper, and because I will really do it more like even faster than a seminar. So you know the particles, you know everything. Yes, no, you don't know everything. So that was the discussion by Yariv, whether thermodynamic pressure, hydrodynamic pressure, and mechanical pressure are equal or not. And remember, the momentum conservation would give you some equality. The Boltzmann distribution would give you another one. At equilibrium, you have both, so you have equality of the tree. That was his first lecture. 1 minute. Now here we have active system, and so we know nothing, especially if they don't conserve momentum. Then he told you about this experiment of how the mechanical pressure is defined this way. Rho gradient of the potential. You remember this expression? He wrote it many times. And then he was discussing when there is equation of state or not, and generically there is no. And there is only if you have no torque acting on the particles, no alignment, only pairwise standard interactions, and that's it. Okay, so let's keep this. Because of what we know about our grains, that even without the wall have a torque, even without collision have a torque, there is much chance that they don't obey an equation of state from the mechanical pressure. So we made the following experiment. These are standard disks, the isotropic one. They are not equilibrium, but I hope they will behave nicely. And this is a little chain. This is also made of hard beads. So all this is essentially hard. So all this is essentially entropic. So the fact that I'm out of equilibrium from this system will not matter much because it's all entropic. It's a matter of looking for place and configurations. Temperature scales or energy scales are not relevant because I will never bounce, I will never deform the particles or enter the potential of the particles. So I have much chance that it behaves nicely as at equilibrium. First thing that I observe is that, so I put my disc here, I shake. The first thing that I observe is that, well, this is like an arc circle. And that's nice because since it's like an arc circle, I can easily describe it, make some geometry, and find that my mechanical pressure will be a force divided by the radius, where the force is the force here. Okay, so this is akin to the Laplace law. Okay, but of course I need to know how, unfortunately I have no spring here. If I had put spring here, little springs, the experiment would be done. This would be a way to measure the pressure. I have no spring, so I need a model for the chain to compute this force. It was quite stupid not to have little springs. There are also technical reasons, but okay. So I need a model that will relate what is the force tangent to these membranes as a function of the average length of this membrane. What I call the average length is that this membrane is fluctuating a lot. And so I take all the position of the grains, I average them. This makes me an average membrane, macroscopic object, if you want, an ensemble statistic object, which never exists in real life, that has a certain length, which is always shorter than the real length of the chain. Okay, and this I can make your favorite polymer-like model. We try to mimic what the chain are really doing. So it's really rigid rods that can rotate a small angle essentially with no cost, and then there is a sharp constraint. So also there it's a hard potential, and they have essentially a fixed length. So you sample this Monte Carlo, you assume it's equilibrium, you sample this, you compute the partition function, you condition it by a force by putting Lagrange constraint, and you get your average length as a function of the force and what is J? At the number of particles, the length of the number of units in the chain. So that's what you get. So essentially you compute L as a function of F and then you inverse it, and what you get is actually beta F, like when you get beta P. You never get P alone when you do StatMech, you get beta P. And since beta is not well defined here, this will be a multiplicative constant, I don't know. But okay, I have beta F as a function of my average length, and I here divided by the true total length of the chain. Okay, so this is my constitutive law, my elastic law for my chain. Okay, then I will apply it, and so I will measure a pressure for this system. And this is the system of the isotropic disk, and I find a curve here that again has a multiplicative factor that I don't really know. But if I had the thermal temperature, then I can try up to a multiplicative constant to fit it by the Kernan-Stirling law, and it's okay. So it's a nice equilibrium hard disk with a temperature that is what it is. Then I can do it for the self-propelled particles. Same game. I will just replace the particles by the self-propelled one. Again, it looks like being an arc circle. Play the same game, and I find another curve that, of course, I don't know what it is. I notice something. It has a different concavity. That's interesting because to have a different concavity at equilibrium, you need some attraction. So this is a little bit of the effective MIPS. And unfortunately, I don't know what's going on there. Cannot go too dense. But okay, that's nice. But I was using one chain. Now, what if I change the chain, which consists in changing my barometer? So I will change the chain. So I will show you a movie. I hope it's this one. No, it's this one. It's the next one, sorry. So here I have 627, don't ask me why this bizarre number, isotropic particles. And I put here self-propelled particles so that on average the chain remains flat. And because the pressure are not at all the same dependence in density, you see I need much less self-propelled particle than isotropic to have the same mechanical pressure. For one chain, there is no problem. A mechanical equilibrium holds.
So why can you measure a pressure that has this curvature? I mean, you would have an instability, I guess.
But I'm not there yet. No, I don't have instability. For the moment, I don't have negative comprehensibility. It's okay. For the moment, it's okay. I will have trouble later. Okay, so let's look at this movie. So you see I have added self-propelled particles, and then I try on average to have something flat. And I needed 200 self-propelled particles, roughly. And then I change the chain, but I don't change the number of particles. And then what you see is that the self-propelled are more efficient now. They are somehow slightly disturbing the chain like this. Now I say, okay, let's try to recover the flat chain. I have to remove 125 self-propelled particles to have something more or less flat. Well, now the number of particles is small, so the fluctuations are very large. But so obviously, to have changed the chain, I had to move from 200 to 75, which means they are not developing the same pressure for the same density. And so I can reproduce the measure here. And for the isotropic particles with the other chain, I essentially find the same thing. And now here I have something a little bit different. But this little bit is actually, it plays an important role in terms of density. That's why I could see the effects. I don't know. No, I don't know. I tell you, really, I don't know. Now, Okay, so the reason is active torque. You know the story. And now I want to conclude with something very bizarre. Yes, just a moment. Oh yes, no, it's a good time for the question. Aha. Let me come back to this after. Just I close with this. So now I put only self-propelled particles and the same amount on both sides. And I thought I would have something flat. Instead of, at least. And there, this is not what happens. I see an instability that actually depends on the average density on each side, etc. We studied this in detail, but I mean, it's only experimental results. But this is the fact that there are currents that develop because the wall is soft. Remember that Yariv showed you that if you take an undulated wall, you will create currents, and the pressure will depend on where you are. But here, my wall has not a definite form. So if I have a slight modulation at some point, whoops, the pressure increased in that place. It amplifies the game because now the currents couple with the shape of the wall, and the wall is related to the currents because they condition the pressure, and I get an instability. That is apparently long wavelengths because it takes the size of the container. I don't know more. Well, it becomes more and more difficult to measure, I would say, rather. The fluctuations becomes larger, so I would not have a definite conclusion there. So exactly, now, this point, I would go with my code, try to have a model for the chain, and start doing the things quantitatively. That's really the example of, I would not have started playing with the code with a chain if I had not done the experiment. But the experiment drives me to do this. Okay, so that comes back to the question of Kevin. What is the difference between the two chains? In the paper, we show that the constitutive law are a little bit different, but very little. So it's not really the static, it's the dynamics. The two chains have a very different dynamics, and this is really coming back to the first lecture of your school, Jorge Kurchan, who told you we are out of equilibrium. The static cannot tell you everything because we are out of equilibrium. And indeed, what happens is that the other chain, which is essentially the same length in centimeter, has more little units, and also these little units, they bounce more on the vibrating plate. And so they have a dynamics that is much faster. And so one re-equilibrates faster than the other as compared to the persistence time of the self-propelled particle. For diffusive particle, this does not matter because they are diffusive, so they don't compare with the restoring force of the chain. So it's the dynamics of the chain that makes the story different.
At equilibrium, you can play games like relating the compressibility to a pair correlation function.
We didn't do it. That's.
But could one perhaps understand this in terms of a negative pair correlation function? So there's some kind of effective attraction.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
This gives rise to a negative compressibility.
Yes, absolutely. So this has been done numerically, for example, by Ludovic Berthier in detail. I didn't show you something about active particles in the first slide of this presentation. That is a work by Cécile Cotin-Bison with colloids, where here they have measured, I don't detail, it's just to answer your question. They have measured some kind of pressure by having colloids that you make them facing gravity. And you see here that the pressure as a function of packing fraction, what it does, it makes a large plateau. This plateau suggests that actually it's something like this, and of course when you do experiments in a large system, you will never see the unstable part of the system. So the system jumps from there to there. But this is just to. Okay, question about this story about pressure. You see it was short, but I mean, after the lessons of Yariv, I think it was very nice and easy illustration. Questions? Further? Because then you have, okay. Because I wanted to remain in the state where the self-propelled particles do not yet form the little aligned clusters. I wanted to be in the gas to discuss this equation of state. I know that I mean the active liquids with a polar phase. For sure, I have no equation of state. That's for sure. So I want it to be in the case where I remain in the disordered state from the point of view of the collective motion. Okay? Okay, so yes, go ahead. Yes, yes. Ah, no, no. There's no. This is, I think, a very interesting field. Is a lot is known about the transition to collective motion. For particles which essentially do not slow down, velocity is constant. And a lot is known about MIPS for particles that do not align and the velocity decreases with density. And I think a very interesting topic of research is to consider a real system, but still a model of a real system where you have both effects. I think some in the room I know are going to work on that in January. Okay. And then the last thing, which is now related to Laetitia's lecture. So it's nice. After 2 weeks, you have like a sum up of. Is okay, what happens if I do this? I'm free to do this in my experiment. I can put as many disks as I want. Actually, it's a bit difficult to do, but okay. Because there are active forces. And this time, like through a biological system, the active force, they climb on each other and they start to pile. And even if I have my glass plates, actually they pile and I have a really serious trouble. And when you have put 3,000 of them, it's a bit unfortunate to have to redo that. Okay, so what will happen? Let's think about it. So it's the question of active particles that become dense. So it's the same discussion as Laetitia. But now on top of that, they align. So we have two orders. One is the six-fold symmetry and the translational order. And then this one at equilibrium, we have this Mermin-Wagner terms that tells us no long range. But we are not at equilibrium, something else could happen. Now the other one is the orientational one, the XY model orientational one. The Mermin-Wagner theorem tells us you cannot have long-range order. But here we have learned with Vicek that yes, we can. So we have two continuous order that both in 2D at equilibrium are forbidden. One we already know that it has a chance to develop if alignment is strong enough. The other one we don't know. Then on top of that, we have learned, because of the lecture about collective motion, that to develop the alignment, you need to relax your time. You need that N and V have times to recover. That was the mechanism of the P delta P. No need to say that P delta P here, the modulus of P equal 1 is certainly wrong everywhere, every time. The particles are colliding permanently at very high frequency. I mean, here packing fraction is 0.1895. The maximum is 91. So what will happen? Will I break this translational symmetry or not? Will I have orientational order? What do the two instabilities compete with each other, or on the contrary, they favor? I mean, the door is completely, I mean, the field is really open. Let's see what, come on, forget about this. Okay, so this is the table that Laetitia did 1 week ago. These are the questions that are raised. Let's see what the simulations tells us in the literature. Leuven's group, 2012. It's an active system of active Brownian particles. They are not aligning. And there is a transition from the liquid to the solid. This is, okay, look at the axes are a bit bizarre because I want you that they are all the same. This is the packing fraction. This is the activity. This is equilibrium. So here you would have essentially the exatic-like story. And then when you are active, you open this regime of exatic domain, and you have a transition from solid to liquid. And he didn't care about knowing whether it was complicated first order or not. It was just, I mean, a simulation like this. Then there is this very important work. It's not an archive anymore, sorry, about this persistent motion in a system, so in a Monte Carlo dynamics. Sorry, what is this? Relapse. Yes, this is what system is this? Sorry, I'm a bit lost. Yeah, there's a persistence. Okay, this is active Brownian particles in some sense with a persistence length. They are not aligning. This is equilibrium. And then when you add the this is the MIP stuff. And then here you have, if you zoom here, the exotic domain. And you see, in this case, when you add activity, everything moves to larger density, like here. Everything moves to larger density. Here it actually narrows. And in all cases, it does not interact with the problem of MIPS. This is the thing that Laetitia showed you. So again, I had to switch the axes. I don't know why people don't make an effort to all have the same axis, but anyhow. Packing fraction, persistence length. And here, so she has one system where the exotic phase was continuing. So the Dumble system, the exotic phase was continuing and actually encompassing the MIPS region. And the hard sphere system, or the 1 over R to the 20 system, she had something that was much more similar to that one. And this is unpublished work by Ludovic Berthier with WCA potential. And again, here he has something that goes to the right, but then seems to go to the left and maybe plays with MIPS. But okay, this is really difficult simulations. All this is not aligning. So not aligning, okay, the physics is not so different. There is an exotic transition. There will be a regime where it will be first order. It may go to a regime where it becomes second order. Okay, but the physics is not that different. The common point is that the solid phase is pushed towards higher packing fraction. Now, what about if you align? So if you align, there are two papers. One is a theoretical paper. So large distant physics, you have a phase field crystal model of freezing. So this is models for studying freezing at equilibrium. Then a Toner tube model for the dry active system. You take one, you take two, you shake. And you make some kind of a density functional theory with this. And what they find is a transition from a static to a traveling hexagonal state. So it means they find a regime where you have an hexagonal state. I don't know if it's true long-range order or not. Maybe in the theory you cannot even ask this question. And they move. So it's a flying crystal. Nice. Then there are simulation in a microscopic model. So it's a Vicek model with alignment and repulsion, which is a nice idea to start with. And in this case, so there are two order parameters, the polarization, the magnetization of the system, and whether it's crystalline or not. And you see it's amazing. Where it's crystalline, it does not polarize. And where it's liquid, it polarizes. So there's an exclusion of the two orders. Seems that if you want to align, you cannot crystalline, and if you want to crystalline, you should not align. That's at least the conclusion of this paper. Okay. So, again, you know now these slides, you have seen it 3 times. It's 5 minutes, huh? So let's keep this. Okay, we can look at the pair correlation function. I just showed them because there was a question about them. I don't remember where it was. Someone asked whether you can see. Yes, it was you who asked about the pair correlation function. So here they are. So these are pair correlation function as I increase the packing fraction for isotropic particle, the standard one. And these are the standard liquid pair correlation function that you would have for crystallization towards the hexagonal order. You would see that when you increase the packing fraction, at some point you develop peaks at the position of the hexagonal distance. And then when you further increase the packing fraction, you would see that these peaks merge to the left, move to the left, because you have your crystal, but there is still a lot of place. The crystal is made around 0.70 in packing fraction, and you can still go up to 0.91. So you have a crystal, but that vibrates a lot. And so you can still compress. And then you will have your peaks moving to the left because the distance between the particles decrease. For the self-propelled particles, first we see peaks. Okay, so some order develops. And then something that we notice is that these peaks, actually they don't move. That is, once they form, they are at a very specific distance, and it happens that this distance is the one of close packing. So when the crystal, or let's say the structured phase develop, it is already at close packing. But that's not possible because at packing fraction of 0.71, You cannot be everywhere at close packing. That's not possible. So it means that not all particles are participating to this. And indeed, if you look at snapshots, this is the psi6, the hexagonal order parameter that Laetitia introduced. For the isotropic particles, you see that the hexagonal order develops everywhere simultaneously when you increase the packing fraction. So in yellow, it's when it's order. And here you see that no, even at packing fraction up to 0.8, there are droplets that are not. So this one is actually at close packing, and these ones are not, even there is no order. Phase coexistence, then you would say. Is this phase coexistence? Okay, you can measure the order parameter. You have a nice continuous-like, because of course my system is not very large. So continuous-like transition for the isotropic with a susceptibility. Well, let's keep that. Let's go to the qualitative statement. Let's keep that. Let's see the dynamical structure factor of this bizarre system. For the isotropic, you are in the liquid, so your density fluctuations, correlations, space correlation relax as a function of time. And then at some point, when you enter the ordered phase, they don't relax anymore. Okay, that's equilibrium behavior. Now for the active one, if it was a phase separation, then there would be a fraction of the particles that do not relax the density fluctuation, and then a fraction of them where you have not ordered yet, where the density fluctuations would still relax. And so you would have a relaxation of this overlap, so-called overlap parameter, but it would end up at a value between 0 and 1, which would give you the percentage of particles that have relaxed and the one that have not relaxed. And when you increase the packing fraction, you would expect that this plateau increases because more and more of them are in the ordered phase. So I would have expected something like the liquid when everybody is liquid-like, then a small plateau when a few of them, small clusters appear, and then this plateau would have increased. And that's not at all what I see. The density fluctuations still relax, even at packing fraction of 0.9. So I cannot see this system as two phases. One non-relaxing one and one relaxing one. One fast one and one slow one. One liquid one and one solid one. This is not true. More than that. The reason what happens is that you form indeed in the static picture almost close packed domain, and then there is the surrounding disordered state. But now these things will be cut in pieces, merge. It's not only that you are evaporating at the boundaries. You cannot define a phase. The dynamics of this is a perpetual renovation of these clusters on time scale that are the one of the liquid, not the one of the solid. And because of this, it's more like a liquid of clusters. And this holds as long as one cluster reaches the system size. I don't know for large system, probably the same dynamics will hold on forever. Okay, and now let me conclude. So this is what I said, disordered, these clusters, and even here, these things, it's a static picture, but then if you look later, it's not that this droplet has moved, it's that this has broken in piece a little bit, etc., etc. And so what's going on here? Now I'm sure that at 0.912, they are close packed, all of them are close packed. I put them in an hexagon. So I'm sure there's no frustration of geometry, everything. They don't move. They are stuck, even the vibrations cannot provide them energy anymore. So I want to know what's going on there. Okay, this you know. And so I will start with this in a simulation, because I have a code where I am sure I can avoid geometrical frustration and all kinds of things. So these are self-propelled particles at the packing fractions of 0.87, exactly the model that I introduced you to describe the disk. Initial condition, it's all disorder in orientation, but they are perfectly packed. And you see that it's fluctuating a lot. Imagine they are colliding at a frequency that is like mad, but still, I colored them initially from blue to red, and you can see, because it's periodic bonding connection, that there is a motion. So I have a slowly flying crystal. The average magnetization is not 0, although it is highly fluctuating, and it moves. And we could compute where it's moving in the phase diagram of the parameters that you know alpha and the noise. And it has the same shape as the one in the limit of 10 minus 3 packing fraction. I mean, this is amazing. It is just a little bit shifted and a little bit lower, because of course it's not so easy to align, but it resists like mad. Especially given that I explained you that the mechanism needs relaxation time. So it means that when you don't have relaxation times, it's the multiple collisions that still build up the correlation. And this, of course, we are not able to describe. And now, a question. What happened in this case? So now, I have closed boundary conditions. It's not periodic anymore. I fly. If I fly, I need free space, right? It's like in Star Wars. You need to... But now here, I'm in an hexagon, right? So what happens now? Packing fraction is again 0.87. There's no place. It's a perfect hexagonal lattice. No defect introduced. I could also play with this, and we did it. But I want to conclude here. What's going to happen now? I may have currents. Why not? So let's see what's going on. And there is very, very little noise. So it's a hard disk liquid of self-propelled particles with very little noise. And there is a little bit of space, just a little bit. And so they do align. They do form a current, a macroscopic current, not small currents. And the crystal flow organizing himself in a way that depends on the boundary condition, as you expect for any flow. And it concentrates in the center the space that it has. This is what is amazing. It has more space before here than after. Okay, then, of course, finite size effect. This is with no noise. This is simulating the equations that I give you with no noise. You have a perfect clock with defects that are sent from the corners to the center. It's nice, no? And what is really nice is that these ones, they are making like the Tour du Mont Blanc. And these ones, they are making like the Tour des Ouches. But there is no shear. So these ones are going at the same velocity as these ones. So where is the shear? The shear is all localized in these defect lines. They all ensure just by geometry arrangement all the shear that you exactly need to make this. It's absolutely amazing. Okay, I conclude with an hexagon with 30,000 particles. So this is a heavy simulation. So now defects are more disordered. The question is, will it rotate? Will it be a macroscopic stuff or not? And there it goes. It isolates regions in the center, not permanently, intermittently, to accommodate from this problem of shear. And then all the things there are rotating like ordered phase. And you have these disordered things with this boundary that organize there. And as large as we could go, the things remain. So it's not a finite size effect. This can be seen on this curve here, where we have plotted the velocity of this rotation as a function of the radius, normalized by the size of the system. And you see that when you increase the system size, you rotate faster, and the fraction of the system that is not rotating because of the problem of in the center is actually decreasing. So I expect that in the infinite size limit, this thing is still rotating. And sorry? Yes. Yes. That's amazing. Okay, so that's the end. Just, of course, for the fun. The hexagon, it's important, actually, for the defects. In the hexagon, in each triangle, the exactic order is the same. It has the same orientation, because the boundaries do not frustrate the hexagonal lattice. In the triangle, it's also true. In the square, it's not true anymore. But in the triangle, it's hard to rotate in the corners. So, okay, let's finish with these two movies. I mean, if someone wants to do the theory about this, is most welcome. So you see in the triangle, it managed, after some time, it managed to travel here and makes lines that will be the bisectors of the angles. And here, it's more like in the hexagon, except that you have more geometrical frustration. And here, the orientation is not the same as here. So you cannot just have instantaneous defects, you need defect lines. But okay, that's more like zoology of all what could happen in this system. There is shear in these regions, always, always, you need. In this part, no. In this part, they all move. If there was shear, you would see defects. Because if there is shear, you need to go from the hexagonal lattice to the next one through the square, and there would be a pair of defects developing. So if you don't see defect, there is no shear. Here there is a little bit of noise. We didn't play much. I mean, then it's many parameters to explore. But so we didn't play. There is a little bit of noise. If there is no noise, the simulation is impossible to do. Strictly no noise. It's an event-driven simulation. So computing when two particles that are moving in almost infinitely, almost parallel directions, they will collide in ages, and you have to compute all the other events that are possible in between. So no way. So you need some noise. Okay, let's stop here and let's have lunch. Thank you very much.